West Coast. I was just telling Kyle that like, man, it's that time of year where everyone's got their outdoor coming in, and the weather's just becoming really unfriendly to outdoor right now.
Yeah, well, we got like a major windstorm coming in up here, so there's going to be power out and stuff, I'm sure.
Oh, that sounds thrilling. So, man, you've been on the show plenty of times. We haven't been on since you opened your spot out in Oregon, and that's kind of what I want to talk about, because it's kind of a lifelong quest for you to be able to provide quality genetics to the people.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, cutting out all the middleman and just doing it all ourselves, that's what I've been waiting to do, and unfortunately Washington shut the door on that. I didn't really have, to be honest, the right team with me in California, and Colorado just wasn't for me. So Oregon is a good spot, and I love the Northwest. I've lived up here for almost 15 years.
So tell us about the concept behind what you're doing out there. It's obviously not just a dispensary.
Nope, we have a full production nursery and a seed bank where basically, we provide mostly production clones for other producers. I like to feel like our nursery game is pretty on point, and I think if you look at our pictures of what we sell as quote-unquote clones is more like miniature trees. But, we're putting those out there and helping producers get their gardens on track and, to be honest, make it more profitable for them, because if you don't have to pay for vegging and cloning and doing it all in your own facility, you actually make more money converting those lights to flowering. It's just a matter of having a clone producer that can provide you a consistent, authentic supply of what you need.
Sure. And
healthy, of
obviously
course.
The economics there are huge. If you can devote your whole, all your lights to blooming, you're bringing in a lot more revenues.
Absolutely, and you're mitigating your risk to contamination to a certain degree. Of course, 100% of this is dependent on who you're trusting as your nursery provider, but it's extremely common practice in agriculture to not do any of your own propagation, to pay for that, and then have cycles of production.
So that kind of is a great intro to, obviously, you being on that end of the situation, being the provider of that. You have to ensure that A, the quality's there, B, that the genetic integrity is there, and C, that these things are clean, because people are counting on these to kind of be plug and play, right?
Correct.
So how do you go about that? I mean, what is that? I guess it starts with your facility design.
Yeah, facility design. A lot of it's proprietary. We're not really trying to teach other people how to do it.
Sure.
That's why I've been doing it for 15 years and have been able to keep the mother plants that I have for this long and not have to re-up them. And that's, why you guys know me as what I've done, is because I know how to keep mother stock long-term and how to keep it healthy and pest-free and also pesticide-free.
And you're kind of my go-to guy when everyone says, oh, well, genetics will drift over time. And you're kind of the one guy who says, well, if you do it wrong, they will, but if you do it right, they will stay exactly the same.
Yeah, I mean, it is possible that you could have drift, like epigenetic drift or something like that, but it's unlikely, and B, it probably would have more drastic effects than what we're actually seeing, right? So a twisted leaf, but the plant still performs correctly, isn't really a sign that the genetics have eroded necessarily.
Right.
It could be
more than one leaf if that had happened, right?
Even if it is on more than one leaf, I mean, when you're talking about the genetic integrity of something being compromised, you're talking about not specific trait. Well, I mean, it could be a specific trait, but it's going to affect the entire plant, not just like one trait that we can actually perceive with our five senses. There's millions of genes in these plants, which are much more complicated than we are as humans genetically. And we're only using our five senses to really even just look at the plant, smell at it, oh, this one has a stem rub. That's not relevant to what's actually happened genetically in the plant and whether or not a mutation or drift exists.
Sorry, buddy.
It's more of a genetic thing than it is necessarily something you can always perceive 100%, right?
So is there anything you look for to kind of keep your eyes out to see if, like, oh, you know what, this one might have some kind of genetic problem? Or is it something you just never say?
I don't think I've ever seen that, to be honest. I think it's more related to, this plant was only meant to live for 3 to 6 months at a time in nature, and it was supposed to go to seed every year, right?
Yeah, it's an annual.
So when you start maintaining this plant for many, many years beyond its natural life cycle, things like hormonal changes in the plant, the ability for the plant to produce certain growth auxins or growth hormones, and all that kind of stuff can be not necessarily eroded or changed, but the plant doesn't perform the way it used to just because it's old. It may have been treated improperly. It's maybe gone into like a homeostasis kind of growth pattern where it doesn't want to come out of it and rejuvenate to its former health. Those, I think, are not necessarily genetic related. Those are things that we're perceiving, and it's probably more related to horticultural practice than it is to actual genetic change, like DNA change, which is, much harder to necessarily perceive.
Sure, unless you're looking
like
at...
you could have genetic drift technically, and you wouldn't even see it. It could just be affecting a part of the plant's mechanism that we don't even know.
Sure,
right? Or
cellular respiration could be down a little bit or up a little bit, or the mitochondria,
whatever, or root growth, or ability to uptake certain whatever it is, yeah. Right? I mean, I don't think we've necessarily studied this plant or broken it down genetically to even understand half of the genes and what they do in this plant.
So,
I mean, I can't remember what it is, but it's, the cannabis plant, in most plants in general, many, many times more complex and have many, many times more data in their DNA than we do,
And there's so much variety, obviously, in the cannabis genome when you look at sort of the range of aromas, for example. There's no other flower on earth that can put out that many vastly different smells, but this one plant can. And so to me that means that there's this like really malleable genome in there, or a lot of potential in that genome. So a slight mutation would be, as you said, either could be undetectable or could be totally change the way the plant looks, be
correct, exactly. And being able to correlate that as being genetic versus age or horticultural practice, I don't think we have nearly enough data to support an argument towards either direction.
So, I think that.
But I will say that I genetic because I have plants that are 15 plus years old, and that I know were 10 years old when I got them, which makes them 25-year-old plants, and not the actual plant, but of course clones
sure.
that have been propagated. And that plant, if given a proper environment and proper feeding and growth pattern, grows just as well as it ever did. Right. So, like I said, I can't say that it doesn't happen, but I can't necessarily say that I've seen it either. Right.
Sure. And now, would you include, say, changes in aroma that we see? Something just used to be the super funk, but after the generations, people say it's tired, it's worn out, just doesn't keep the same funk. I mean, on the one hand, that could be genetic, right? Because whatever's sequencing for that.
I mean, I've never seen that personally.
So what do you?
I've never seen a plant lose its funk unless it starts becoming a dud, right? Which that is some type of infection or some type of pest of some sort. That's not genetic.
Sure.
That much I do know because I've seen that, and I've seen it eradicated from tissue. So, and then culture, of course, is always going to be the real savior in that. Is that if you were to take compromised tissue and then regenerate it and see if it actually performs the way it used to through tissue culture, then you could essentially prove, even without DNA testing, that it probably hasn't been compromised genetically.
For sure, absolutely, because the tissue culture would then, if it were genetically compromised, that would happen even after the culture. So are you guys...
Yeah, it would still be after the culture. You'd still have the same problem. So,
are you guys doing it? Do you do any tissue culture out there? Are you playing with it? I know it's something we've talked about a lot.
No, we're currently not. I mean, for such a short-lived plant, I think consistent performing seed is much more usable and valuable for pest-free cultivation than culturing, because you're just talking about the expense and the amount of time. And you know as well as I do, knowing what people want product-wise 6 months ahead of time, because it takes us 6 months to gear something up to produce it, right? It's really hard to do. So it's like, let's just say theoretically, Girl Scout cookies is the thing that's hot right now. Well, by cultured it, propagated it, and then got thousands of them available, you're a year or two late to the party, right? So what's the efficacy of that for anything other than a certain type of continual production with a known demand?
Sure, that's good for your Blue Dream or whatever, your just basic cash crop.
Right. But you can't necessarily chase the new flavor or whatever it is, because it's going to take you so much time to implement it into practice.
Sure, and so that's a great segue to what's kind of one of the things that makes your work and your collection so interesting is usually you get guys who are preservationists or guys who are chasing the hot new thing. And you're sort of like in the best of both of those worlds. You only preserve really obscure stuff that's special to you. And you really, as far as hot new things, it's really like the hardest to get your hands on, rarest hot new things that you work with.
Yeah, and a lot of it seems to be taking over. I mean, I know way few people still growing cookies in California, and way more growing do-si-do. So it's just I think the new is the old in most cases.
Oh, sure, because new to me, then it's new, right? Like if
right. Well, and in the case of the cannabis marketplace, what's the majority of heavy cannabis consumers are between the ages of 18 and 32 or something like that?
Sure, exactly. So if you have a strain that's older,
like that's not the average age of the consumer, but I'm talking heavy consumers who buys a quarter ounce of oil a week or something. It's not the 45-year-old guy with 3 kids.
For sure.
Right? Taking dabs at a soccer game. That's not what's going on. There's a few of them, but I don't think it's commonplace.
Sure, it's not the majority.
Right. But, if we're talking volume, you got to cater to a certain crowd. And I mean, what was fresh to me 12 years ago doesn't even exist on the palette of people who are 10 years younger than me right now. Right.
Right.
So, someone was asking me why I don't bring back, or why this most recent release of seeds that I did was all cookies and OG stuff, because that's all people ask for. And to be honest, there's no real way to reintroduce old flavors to people that have never even experienced it, much less even appreciate things that don't have the look and the wow factor of a lot of today's polyhybrids that are extremely popular, so like OG. And
I got this theory, and I'm curious to get your input on it. I call it the Instagram effect, but I think the sheer fact that most bud is sort of shared with most people in photo form has sort of biased the average consumer towards the visual, the bag appeal, rather than the smell, rather than the high.
Right. We have a globalized outlook on almost every product in the world now, right? Because everybody's looking at what someone 5,000 miles away from them is smoking on or enjoying or smoking out of pipes-wise or whatever. And you're able to influence people globally, not just locally. And, 20 years ago, before we had the internet or any of this kind of stuff, your ability to impact people more than a few hundred miles away, especially in an illegal substance type of market like cannabis, was slim to none. You'd have to sell a bag that sold a bag to your buddy, and somehow he didn't smoke it all. He saved a gram and flew to LA and showed it to his buddy. Right? I mean, it just, shit didn't go that far.
Well, and I think in similarly, all sharing of cannabis information was much more local. If you were close enough to see it, you could smell it. And so the smell was a lot more important 10 years ago.
Exactly. And so we had those localized markets that were very robust and had their own agenda in terms of what types of flavors and smells and stuff they liked. I mean, when I first started growing OG up here in Seattle in 2004, I smelled the shit. Nobody wanted it at all, period. And it was, I mean, Poison OG, I had Ghost, Oregon Kids cut from him, I had Sour Kush, I had Smelly It, I had Blackberry Bubba Kush, I had Pre-98 Bubba. I had all that stuff. It didn't make any difference to anybody up here at all. No one could give a shit about any of that stuff because the flavors that were popular up here were Albert Walker, Williams Finger, Dog Shit, lots of sativa stuff, you know?
Sure. And
now it's the complete opposite. No one could care less about those old flavors because it doesn't look like OG.
And that's
right?
Nationwide. That's the crazy thing to me is that so much
Correct.
of the breeding is pulling away. And now we're getting into this, you know, really tight polyhybrid gene pool where, you know, someone's going to go take your Do-si-dos and cross it to their OG and then cross that to another cookies. And, like, we're really getting into a very tangled inbred line there.
Right, but I mean, you know, what's the difference between Pepsi-Cola, Coca-Cola, and whatever? It's cola, right? And then you've got Sprite, 7-Up, and the other things. It's basically all the same flavor.
Sure,
right?
You're not going to get that far drastically off.
No, you're not going to move that far away from what's considered a globalized or nationalized standard of quality for whatever, right? And there's only going to be tiny markets that really even care about that boutique stuff. Because, I mean, think about it like this. In 10 years from now, the people that are 32 years old that are on the back end of their cannabis consumption, heavy cannabis consumption,
yeah,
they would have been, their entire adult cannabis consumption was raised in legal cannabis, like here in Washington, which, to be honest, is sad. It's sad that there's 18-year-old kids right now that are being lied to about everything that they're buying in the stores in I-502, and there's no authenticity in almost any of the products there. I mean, there's a few producers and there's a few new ones that are coming on, but it's commercialized, industrialized, agricultural garbage for the most part.
So when you're saying they're being lied to, are you talking about the genetics that they're receiving, or in what way?
Right, exactly. The genetics they're receiving, what pesticides are being used on it, and the state's doing nothing about it. I mean, what was it, 8 months ago? Uncle Ike's, which is the biggest store in the whole state, they do like, I don't know, a couple $1 million a month or something like that.
That's a big store.
They did an independent review of all the flowers that we're receiving, because there's no, even though it's stated in the law in Washington that they have to test the product for pesticides, the state isn't forcing anyone to do it right now, and has refused to for some reason. They did a test on like 30 things, and like 24 or 26 of them came back with banned pesticides on them of all kinds, some in absolutely absurdly high levels. And that's par for the course, you know? And I'm not saying that illegal cannabis was necessarily that much better, but now you're getting fake genetics with terrible quality and what the government was supposed to do, which is provide quality assurance and testing and make it safe. They're not doing either, right? So what's the whole point of it?
So that's an interesting spin on it, because you mentioned, and it's something that, you know, I think you have been highly influential in sort of creating or how to play a strong hand in educating a lot of the cannabis connoisseurs of today, like the really, truly beyond heady people who really like study their strain history. And a lot of the people who listen to the show, I mean, you were highly influential in teaching Scott Reach a lot of things, and obviously when Kind Reviews was online, Rye got a lot of his information from Scott, and then that information from Kind Reviews went all over the internet.
Right, some of it somewhat secondhand information had to be corrected, but yeah.
Sure, there were a couple games of telephone in there where things didn't get out quite correctly. But, you know, so you've had this perspective, and I always think of you as having like the absolute highest standards as far as a connoisseur goes. But as you just said, like the market for connoisseur herb is relatively small. So do you think the average consumer...
Well, I think it's shrinking.
I think it's shrinking. Right? Interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I think the people that think that they're connoisseurs or are purchasing products based on Instagram or whatever, that think they're purchasing high-end products are. But there's lots of dubious, duped products. I mean, you know, distillate with mimic cannabinoid flavors, quote unquote natural flavoring. I mean, all that kind of, it's so far away from what started this entire industry.
I mean, absolutely. The rise of this little like heady subset has been like an interesting. People are more impressed by the how expensive it is and how it's packaged in some cases.
Correct.
Where I've always been the type of guy to ask for the plain unmarked jar behind the counter because usually that's where the fire is.
Right, and I mean it's not any fault of the cannabis industry. I'm not necessarily saying it's a product of technological globalization of products to a certain degree, right? And we're seeing, like you were saying, the influence of stuff is so more far-reaching that you don't end up with very much localized culture, right? Or localized products that are specific to an area. Now everybody has just the same shit everywhere you go. It doesn't matter, right? Because on Instagram, it's perceived that has the highest value,
sure.
Right?
Yeah. Even 5 years ago, I feel like that wasn't the case, where you had your Colorado strains and California strains and your Northwest strains, and then you had your different Midwest strains and your Texas strains and this and that. And I think that is still somewhat the case, but the strains, there's no such thing as a purely Colorado or purely California or purely Washington strain. Every Texan is still looking for the shoreline or whatever, but and I don't think that is everywhere. So I think there are still those elusive ones, but to your point, how many people are coming up today in this legal market, even considering that there are great lost strains from Texas or things like that?
Right. It's few and far between. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I'm just saying it's unlikely that we're going to see a re-emergence of that type of stuff, in my opinion, simply because the consuming populace that is consuming these products doesn't even remember what illegal weed was like, most of them. If you're 23 years old, what do you remember about scoring the best sack of weed that you've ever smelt in your life, but you don't care if the potency is not 28% or 32%, sure. Right? You didn't care. It was the smell and how good the product was and how well it was grown. It had nothing to do with a label on a bottle or a brand name or any of that shit. Everybody had to come up with their own opinion of what they thought this product was, and that's what used to create the value back in the day.
And I felt like there was you had more variety in everyone's favorite flavors, favorite strains. Like, right. You didn't have everyone likes 3 strains, which is kind of how it is now.
Right. I mean, look at it. The old strains, they had their own names because no one wanted to be associated with it. Now, people will buy anything that's branded a certain name, right? I mean, to make the point, you've got Willie Nelson's weed. Nobody cares what's in the damn jar. It just has Willie Nelson's name on it, right? The same, it's the same thing. They're buying the brand, not the actual product in it. People are seeing with their eyes and not with their nose, right?
And in many cases, in a lot of these states, they're not even seeing the actual product. They're not allowed to see the flower or smell the flower. It has to be sold in a sealed container. So
correct. That's the case here in Washington. So how do you expect it's like, I made this point to someone else the other day, and I was like, how do you expect the kids these days, let's say you're 20 years old or 22 years old, population-wise, there's very few of them that appreciate or are going to go through the trouble of owning like a 1955 Chevy Bel Air as their, right?
Right.
It sucks down gas. It smells. It's old. It's rusty. You got to fix a bunch of parts. They're hard to find. It's more work. Or you can hop in a new Tesla for $35,000, the new Model 3. The shit's as fast as a Ferrari was 10 years ago, right? It's quiet, doesn't use gas, and you plug it in when you get home. I mean, how do you even expect them to gain an appreciation for those old vehicles if they don't even remember what gas engines were like? I was reading this stat the other day that in 1982, 91% of the kids in America under 24 had their driver's license. It's 79% now, right?
Really? I mean, I have a similar thing on that.
Yeah, because people are using Uber and Lyft and all this stuff. People that live in a city don't even care about owning a car anymore. And I'm not saying that this is I'm just pointing out things that are indicative of the way that a lot of markets are going, right?
I agree, and I think You know, we see it. One thing kind of that you keep saying that I think about all the time. My daughter's 2 years old. She'll never have a pot dealer in her life. She'll buy pot over a counter from someone who's not passionate about their product. And that's one thing that's a huge culture change, right? 10 years ago when you bought it from your guy and he had 3 different bags and this was the good one and this was the better one and this was the head stash, but it was way more expensive, but it was totally fucking worth it. You know, there was personal pride because if he didn't really impress you and he didn't seek out and find the best for you, then you were going to someone else. Theoretically, that's kind of the same with dispensaries, but not by any means. They just throw a label on it that says 28% and someone's going to buy it.
Right. I mean, I do a fair amount of agricultural research in terms of agricultural economics. And I came across this interesting article a while ago, and it was about our food. And I think cannabis is the most relatable to food in terms of as an agricultural product, right? It's not like wine or beer, because wine or beer gains value as it ages.
Sure.
Weed doesn't, right? So that means that we're in a perishable market, right? This product perishes, right? You can freeze it and save it, but like if you grow 1,000 pounds of weed this week, you can't sell it. You freeze it, then you harvest another 1,000 pounds next week. Where's it going to go?
Right.
People, how do you create a demand that doesn't exist once you're already overproduce it? And I mean, we've done this with corn in America. I mean, why does your car have 10% ethanol fuel?
Because we got too much corn.
Because we got too much fucking corn, and instead of paying subsidies to farmers, we should create a demand, because you can't. How are you going to get people to drink an extra gallon of liquor a day? They're not, but you can get their car to drink an extra gallon, right?
Sure.
So, and that's how you prop up middle America and reduce some of the subsidies that are out there. You create legislation. Well, how are you going to create legislation to increase cannabis consumption?
I guess that's not really an option. I mean, it would be awesome, right? Like everyone has to smoke 2 joints in the morning and 2 joints before bed.
Right. It's not going to happen, you know? There's no way to increase cannabis consumption, especially drug cannabis, right? The government's never going to give us subsidies because we're farmers, right? They're going to give a fuck, right? So what's the third option? Is government imposed limitation or farmers unions? One of those two, right? So it's an agricultural reality, and this happened to our farms 100 years ago. And back in this was a book in 1908, and it was about the different kinds of apples. And there was 150 different kinds of apples in America, and there are all these different ones. And I can share it with you, Mitch. And what they're saying is that at the turn of the century, all the farms were small, family-owned, family-operated farms. All 3 of my 4 grandparents are all huge farming families, right? Mm. 8 kids in the family and everything. And in farming, what happened is everything became industrialized and centralized production. And now I think there's only 8 types of apple that are really that comprises 90% of the production in America, right? So where did your selection go? Where did your heady apples go? Where did the flavors go? Where did the terps go, bro? Where did our apple terps go?
And
they're gone.
What's interesting, I think,
there's small groups of seed traders, and that preserve that stuff, and that's it. It's not in your supermarket.
And even some of them are extinct. Some of them are just gone. And what's
absolutely.
What's curious, if you look at the trend in apples, and I think that is a really good comparison for cannabis. You have this thing in apples where apples used to be for cider, so they weren't these big sweet apples. They were little and tart, and more nutritious. And the current palate for apples, if you had one of those little Kazakhstan apples, the original evolved apple, people would be disgusted by it. And I guess I fear that a similar thing's happening in the cannabis market, right? We have traditionally smoked flower or hash, right? So that the flavors that were bred into the crops we were using were designed for that. But as that falls out of fashion, just as cider drinking did, and people aren't consuming oil, and now increasingly distillate with reintroduced flavors and things like that, I feel like people are going to, it almost becomes at a commercial level the incentive to say, well, this one doesn't produce a lot of THC and it doesn't produce any specific terpene in great quantity, so we can't really distill that much from it. Even though it's a very unique flavor on its own, no one's going to smoke the flower anyway, so let's just get rid of it.
Right. And it's already happening. I mean, how much more popular are vape pens for the majority of the consuming public?
It's wild to me. It's by
it's
far
absurd, I think. I mean, I'm not even afraid of the oil.
Sure. I just think it tastes like shit and it doesn't get me high.
The pen, to me, is like, it's a smoking device made in China with absolutely no oversight to the health and efficacy of this product, right?
Right.
And you want to stick your mouth in it or stick it in your mouth all day? Like, children's toys come back for lead all the time from China. What do you think is going into these vape pens in terms of production? I mean, some of them are probably good, but I'm just saying, by and large, it's whoever can make it the cheapest.
Absolutely. And I mean, certainly
and cheap shit ain't safe usually.
Especially when it's made in China. I mean, safety is a huge issue, but just on the consumer issue, like, it doesn't have the depth of flavor, right? It doesn't have the potency. But then I see this thing happening that, I think we see with...
Does Budweiser?
Exactly. That's exactly it. And at the same time, like, my dad finally, after now, however many fucking years, said he would smoke a joint with me. I never smoked a joint with my dad, and he will. But now I'm in this thing like, all right, what's the first joint I'm going to smoke with my dad? I don't want to pull out some, OG or something. It's going to get him way too fucking high.
Right.
So you have, and that's from sort of 20 years ago.
You need some Albert Walker.
There you go. And that's comparing herb from 20 years ago to now. But now you have like people. I mean, I understand that distillate is 100% or 99.9%, but you're not getting the same dose when you're taking a little pen rip as you are from taking a bong rip. And I think you're going to see like the appreciation of some of this really strong stuff. There's a thing about some of the really best herb in the world. It's really, really flavorful, but it's also really, really, really strong. And if you can't hang, you can't enjoy it, in a sense.
Yeah, I mean, I don't drink much wine, but I tell you what, if you took me to a wine tasting thing and you said you had to drink every glass, I'd be, schlitzed in no time.
And I think what we have is...
And I'd be able to appreciate any of the wine, because not only do I not have the experience or the depth of palate to even understand, but I'd get drunk so fast I wouldn't even know, right?
I think
that's what you're saying with weed. That's
exactly.
You give one person one dab, and their lid gets blown off. And how do you expect them to really appreciate something when you just rip their head off?
Let alone, okay, now try this one, right? Like, that's never going to happen after that first one.
Right.
And that's very much the case. And it's go ahead, KTI.
No, I've experienced that with first-time stoners. Definitely the predicament of, especially when you don't have selection, you kind of put what's in front of them, or maybe they insist on tobacco, and you just get a bad combination. People get ill or sick and have a horrible experience with it. So,
yeah, I always had a horrible experience with tobacco.
And I feel like with cannabis, there is like that critical core tolerance that comes from whole plant use on a regular basis. Aleister Crowley wrote about it. He wrote that like hashish was extremely powerful, as a spiritual tool. But the problem was you pretty much got to the point where you had like your spiritual powers, and then you got way too high to do anything with them. And he obviously didn't have regular access to great hash to build up the tolerance you need. But that, and maybe it's a tragedy, maybe it's just connoisseurs who think it's a tragedy that this won't be appreciated at, potentially 20 years from now. Many of these flavors that don't look so great on Instagram will be extinct. But then again, it's only the next technology leap, right? What happens when Smellstagram comes out, and then you can smell send smells over there?
I'm not saying that it won't exist. I'm just saying I don't think it's necessarily growing, right? Access to high quality, like 10 plus years ago, if you had access to really high quality cannabis, that the people that were providing that to you were passionate about cannabis and
Absolutely.
Preserving it, growing it well. It wasn't just a happenstance that you got some chronic, right?
Sure.
There's a lot of people that are growing cannabis now just happen to be in cannabis. They don't really have any passion for it. They don't care about quality. They don't even puff themselves, right? So how would you expect them to have a complete understanding? Like, I don't know anything about wine, so why would you ask me what the best wine in the world is?
Let alone ask you to make some wine for me. Right?
Right, exactly. I don't have a clue, right? I don't know anything about it. And I wouldn't even claim to be that person. And the same thing with cannabis. You know, I'm not saying I'm that person either with cannabis. I'm just saying that experience should be a factor, and because a lot of legislation prevented people with felonies that had felonies from cannabis from participating in the industry, you have a much smaller breadth of knowledge of long-term knowledge that's in the legal industry.
For sure. And that's kind of like, so you have these people who are just not even cannabis users who are getting into the industry, but then you have this whole generation of kids who are moving out to legal or medical states from, states where they're still smoking beasters or whatever, and they don't know what they're smoking. And rather than being introduced into this like really rich culture that we had 5-10 years ago, they're being introduced straight into the dispensary way of looking at things is how they think it should be done. Ooh, indica.
Right.
Ooh, sativa.
Well, I mean, they just use their phone to tell them where to go. It's not even right. I mean, they look on Instagram. What's the heady way to smoke? You buy a Quave Club Banger and put it in a recycling pipe, right?
Right. That's
back in the day. Do you remember when in certain towns people were all about hammers, or everybody had a bubbler,
sure,
or this town everybody was into bong snaps, right? It wasn't the same everywhere because everybody developed different cultural norms for their cannabis consumption, and because the consumption was always so closed door, it was tight-knit groups that had all their way of doing it, right?
Absolutely. I think about
and a lot of the people, and the culture was propped up around that.
And now we had our cultural institutions then too, right? Like High Times meant something then. A High Times Cannabis Cup 10 years ago really meant something. 5 years ago still meant something. Now,
sure,
not as much.
It's useless. Yeah, I mean, it's just a carnival. It might as well be a circus.
Yeah, it's
right?
a fucking circus, straight up.
And be king clown, right? And that's that's kind of like what they've turned it into. It's not the people participating because they're just trying to get their brands out there and do whatever. But it's they're making a joke of the entire industry more so than it's ever been under the stoner stigma.
Sure, flesh that out for me a little bit. Explain what you mean there.
Well, the stoner stigma sucked, where everybody thought you forget everything and everything. But the point with that was you could get away with a lot of shit if you were on top of it. Oh, it's just a stoner or whatever, right? And then you fly under the radar, right? Now it's a cultural norm. You just go on Instagram and you can find a kid that's taking selfie dabs, 1 gram selfie dabs or whatever, right? And that's what's popular.
And it is fun.
People wouldn't be caught dead 10 years ago doing that shit.
No, you would never take a picture of yourself smoking pot 10 years ago, unless it was like in Amsterdam or something.
Post it publicly. Go get 100 copies made and put it on a bulletin board at college. No, people didn't do that.
Well, and
so it's like the thing about Instagram and social media is it gives everybody a voice, no matter who you are, and that can be good and bad.
It's funny because we got to contrast that, right, with the forums, because that's what there kind of was. I mean, obviously the forums were critical for you. It's how people got cuts and got to try flavors that they wouldn't have otherwise tried because that
was the original between the cultures. I mean,
right,
when like in 2004. We had our purples up here in Seattle, and in Humboldt they had the Urkel, the purple Urkel, right, or the Urkel or whatever bunch of different names. And up here we had the ultraviolet, purple indica, UW perps, all those things, and it was all 2 different separate families. But at the time, we didn't even know if those 2 varieties were related, similar, or anything. That's how we traded those cuts and developed the information exchange on what they actually were. We didn't even know that existed. I mean, when Jason King did the dog shit in like Cannabible 2 or something like that,
1
right?
or 2, yeah.
And the first time he saw it was in Humboldt, right? And they grew it outdoor, and it was this shorter, fatter plant, different. And he said it was a completely different plant than the herb that he saw up here from us that was also in that same. Well, Inspecta from CSI Humboldt seeds, sorry, the wind's going off here. stuff's coming down.
Don't lose your power.
He got the cut from the group of people that was the dog shit that used it for the Cannabible in Humboldt. We treated the clone, it was the exact same clone, right? So, I mean, you had people reporting that there were differences who weren't the cultivators, for then us to go back, actually trade the varieties and find out they're actually the same. It's just grown outside.
Sure. And I think that's the interesting thing, too, is because previously you had this separation between the grower and the dealer and the smoker. There was like 3 tiers.
Yeah.
And now the grower-dealer is kind of like the dispensary legal weed business, right? Like it's all kind of in one. But there was always a link of removal chain in everything. And
the grower-dealer / Insta celebrity.
Yeah. I mean, but it's curious, and the one thing that this keeps coming to in my mind from what this conversation is like, there's no doubt that cannabis is, at least cannabis as it has been culturally driven, right? The trends, the trends go to the breeding, and the breeding goes to what the plant itself actually is, and it becomes this like cycle, right? And then, but now, because of radical differences, not in cannabis, but in culture, we're seeing this huge sea change in cannabis, in the genetics of cannabis, and in the actual phenotypes that are around to smoke, and the quality of herb that's around.
I think it's simply a product of mass commercialization and industrialized agriculture. I mean, that's all it is. It's happened to our food. It's happened to everything. It's going to happen to our water right after cannabis, right? It'll get privatized, industrialized, and then they distribute it how the government sees fit, right?
And it's going to be like tank
and cannabis was one of the last things that we had as the public, that where we controlled the market 100%, right? It was 100% black market. It was a multi-billion-dollar commerce that happened with absolutely zero oversight, and it regulated itself pretty damn well, right?
And
profits were high.
Well, it's a free market. It's going to regulate itself, you know?
Exactly. It was a free market. Now that you are, it was a free market, and basically nobody got too big back then, because if you got too big, you got busted.
You got clipped,
right?
Yeah.
So basically what we used to have is this giant, robust market that's just as big as it is today, except there was many, many, many small people supporting very small, localized markets and consumers, right? And everything was done by hand. Everything was cared for. There was a person's eyes looking over it. The people dealing it were the people consuming it, and there was a quality that was associated with a lot of that free market. You know, the only thing that prevented it was how illegal it was in some states, was what created the violence that sometimes was associated with cannabis, what was usually rare. I mean, most of the time in weed, someone just got robbed and no one did anything about it.
Sure. Right.
Yeah.
They just disappeared.
As you say, with our regulations and a lot of what Colorado has, I think it kind of tends to lean towards bigger businesses and people with more money. I mean, what with our edible labeling, now you have to be able to afford a whole new thing. You got to be able to afford all the licensing and fees, and obviously that tends to lead to a different kind of person coming into the market.
Oh, and it eliminates all the felons, right?
No,
so
too,
all the people that had previous experience and who were qualified to operate these businesses and potentially seek investment were immediately eliminated, and then you give it to the people with no experience but all the money. You want to fast track the capitalist industrialization, that's what it is.
Well, kicking out the felons, I mean, I'm trying to come up with a politically correct way to say this, but you separated a lot of people. You separate a lot of history and culture from the product.
Exactly.
You completely commodified it, because the keepers of that history and culture are blocked out from the industry. And now the industry...
Correct.
Curiously enough, right? Like, this is one thing we talk about a lot, too. You don't see the fucking president of Pepsi and the president of Coke going at it on Instagram or going at it on Facebook. And there aren't, like, 500 international soda industry events every fucking month. But for some reason in cannabis, we're like, it's almost like the industry so needs to prove to itself that it's professional or that it's an industry that it dives into this over the top.
But, I mean, the only reason that Pepsi and Coke don't fight is because they own the fucking market completely, just between the two of them.
Sure, but
you know what I mean?
That's fair, but you could see that we could see that with some of the bigger providers in each of the little cannabis markets, right? Like, it's not nationwide yet, but in the city, you get your big hash makers beefing with each other, and your breeders beefing with each other, and it's funny because they're on the one hand there is this huge effort to like, oh well, I'm a member of the National Cannabis Industry Association, and I wear a suit and I go to conventions, but like also at the same time we're talking shit on social media, and I don't know. I feel like the industry has itself fooled to a large degree, and unfortunately that is all in line with that separation from the culture and from sort of the authentic roots that comes from keeping out the people who've done this forever.
Correct. That's it, right? How many of these people that are really the big players have any skin in the game from when it was illegal?
Oh, exactly.
Hardly any.
No, because none of them would come in to something that was illegal, and then
they wouldn't have been able to make the money to be able to start these businesses to be that. I mean, it's not this isn't an absolute situation that I'm talking about. I'm just talking about as a general rule. By eliminating felons, making the cost of entry high, you're eliminating the vast majority of the people that were operators prior to any of this stuff. So you're starting out with rich people with no experience. Where do you think the quality is going to go? And
then when they hire, right, people who are maybe
rich people are known for buying poor shit that's poorly made for lots of money. Yeah. Look at the $2,000 backpack from Louis Vuitton.
Sure.
That's dumb shit,
And I think, then you get this additional layer, right? So these people are starting the organizations. They're hiring, let's say they even do hire people who don't have felonies but have some connection. As soon as, at least here in Colorado, as soon as they get you in the industry, they put this badge around your neck. So you're all registered with the state as a weed guy, which is a whole different level to start with. And then you can't smoke at any of the facilities. You can't smoke at work. So you have people who typically were not employed in the main labor force, really in touch with cannabis all day long. And now you have people who, like, maybe they can sneak out and puff down a couple bowls during the workday, but they figured out a way to trick almost everyone who's super passionate about herb in Colorado to not smoke. I think there's this progressive, I don't mean to suggest that it's intentional, right? Like, I don't think there's this conspiracy to ruin cannabis culture, other than High Times, but
it's a product of capitalism. Yeah. It's not a conspiracy. It's this type of market has destroyed almost everything that we have in this country.
And that's I guess the great shame here, right? Is you had this like really free, very almost compassionate, like, I don't know,
independent market,
totally independent, and the general vibe of the cannabis market was not like a lot of other unregulated markets, right? Like, cannabis brought a certain air to it. But that's gone because
Correct.
The people who are selling you your weed, this is, I said before, like, it's one of my great laments that my daughter won't have a pot dealer. What about fucking smoking a bowl with the guy you're picking up a bag from?
Yeah, that was a fun time.
What about
Good
that?
night.
What about that? And being sure that this was the guy you wanted to give your $50 to.
Right, or knowing your grower, right? Knowing your grower personally. You go trim for him, and then that's who you buy your weed from, or whatever,
Or the rest of us, but it's your dealer who
right.
tells you he's not growing, that he buys it from an old hippie, but there's one room you can't go to and back. But yeah, like that guy.
Exactly. Right, exactly. That won't exist, and there's no place for them in the industrial market. I mean, take a drive through Central California and let me know how many heady almond growers there are, or heady raspberry growers there are, or strawberry growers, or anything like that. No, there's one major landholder, and then you have the operator who rents or owns the land, and then they hire basically immigrant labor for as cheap as they can pay them, right? And they use machinery to do as much of the work as possible, and then they bring in seasonal immigrant laborers to do the rest of the work, and that's it.
It's pretty much the opposite.
That's the entirety of right. That's the entirety of the market,
and it's the opposite of like artisanal cultivation, which is
what it used to be,
well,
right?
What it used to be, and this is where it's interesting to me. Like, that's what you're still onto, right? Like, that's now that we've kind of set it up, and sure, that quality market is definitely smaller than ever. It's dying. It's not growing. but you're keeping it real. That's why we love you.
Well, and it's not that it's not not necessarily growing, because there's only 4 legal states,
Sure.
right? So like every state that doesn't have legal weed right now is still on that old school tip for the most part.
For sure.
And those growers that are providing for those people in those areas are paying attention to these trends and the quality here, but they still grow some of their old school stuff and provide that, and then they grow some new seeds or some new clones that they bring in or whatever. And those people that are in South Carolina or Florida or wherever, they're seeing all kinds of shit that they never would have saw before.
And then, there is something that just came up is like, you probably got some growers down south who really still won't fucking dare post a picture of them smoking weed on anything public because it is still high stakes down there. Probably not
Right.
kids. Kids seem to just universally be dumb about social media, but I think there is some chance that in maybe some of these states coming up, local growers could get supported in the legislation, but I think it's a slim chance.
Well, and there's also the rest of the world too, and a lot of the world, California is the most advanced cannabis market other than the legalization part, but in terms of quality and types of products, I would say, and especially volume of products being sold in the world. And it's, just doesn't matter if it's movies or whatever, it's going to trickle down a lot from there.
Sure, absolutely. Major cultural hub. And that's
exactly
what happens when it's New
Very
York
influential.
and LA. When it's LA and New York. And then what I'm really curious to see is where, because everything's kind of different in New York and LA, right? The food's kind of different. The music's kind of different. The scene's kind of different.
Right.
Fashion's different. So how will the cannabis taste? What's the real New York cannabis taste? Because it's not OG versus sour. I'm sure of that.
Right. I mean, I know a lot of OG goes to New York, that's for sure.
Sure. So, but I think there's going to be differences in what people want.
But sour ain't very popular in California anymore.
That's for sure. That is true.
Unless it's going to New York.
But, I know my New Yorker friends they are the craziest about vape pens. That's their because that's so New York. It's quick, it's discreet.
Yeah.
You could do it on the street with everyone. Cali, you're like lounging out, you're breaking out a bong, you got time.
It's still a lot of pens. It's tons of pens down there too.
No,
I think one thing that happens a lot when comparing anything to California is the population difference and how that makes us perceive things that happen there, right? So there's 40 million people on the books in California,
right.
And there's probably 10 million people that are there just living from other states and all over the world that just don't have a California ID.
Minimum.
Right?
Minimum.
At least, right? So you're talking 50 million people in this, a big area, but they're all clustered in the Bay Area and in LA, and that's it, right? In LA, San Diego, right? So you got these very, very dense, highly influential populations there where even a 1% or 1% usage in California is 400,000 people, right? Which is the entirety of a state like Washington, Oregon, or Colorado's market of cannabis consumers, right?
Yeah, I heard 6th largest economy in the world. I knew for a long time it was 8th, but...
What's that, California?
Yeah, California, if you take it by itself, 6th largest economy in the world. Definitely in top 10.
Right. It's crazy down there. I mean, one point and after living there for 2 years that you notice in Los Angeles, there's things that work in Los Angeles that won't work anywhere else because of the type of place that is. And the same thing with the Bay Area. I mean, I remember I was driving through down Wilshire somewhere towards Beverly Hills, and there was a dog daycare, right? For taking your dog in the morning, or they'll come pick it up probably, play with it all day while you're at work until because you probably work in Hollywood or something, and then you come pick it up like it's your kid.
Like it's your kid,
right?
Yep.
Right, and this shit was popping off. I mean, they probably were spending $30,000 a month in rent alone, right? I mean, just for the location, and there was people in and out of there, and I was just amazed that even existed, much less was probably a multi-million-dollar profitable business a year.
Sure. And whereas there
And
wouldn't
it's
be
like-
the economy for that in like Omaha or something.
or even Portland, or even Seattle, or even Houston, or maybe Houston. But like, I mean, there's not a lot of cities that have that kind of market and financial power to just blow on all kinds of shit.
So that brings up an interesting point. Like, we
So
talk
things that may be killer markets in California may be almost practically non-existent in other more small localized markets.
for sure when we look at, and in the end, maybe New York and LA will be pretty similar as a whole, but the middle of America, Iowa, when they eventually legalize at some point, will be totally, I mean, they don't eat the same as we do. And we're here in Colorado.
Well, if you go in the supermarket, it's a lot of the same shit, you know?
Sort of. I mean, this is one thing, I guess, being in Colorado that I noticed. Like, we have supermarkets here that are only natural and organic foods, which is not something. There wasn't even a single one of those in New Jersey.
That only happened. I moved there in 2010 and lived. It wasn't like that in 2010. You know.
For sure. And in Cali, it's actually funny.
That's
'cause
a
you don't see it
recent
there.
thing, and that's because like Colorado is the Los Angeles of the Midwest. If you've got any kind of money and you live west of Kentucky, you kind of go to Denver.
Oh, for sure.
You know?
The one place I've seen multiple doggy daycares is Boulder. Like, there are at least 3 of them
Right.
in Boulder.
Right. It's definitely the LA of the Midwest. So I mean, it's the same thing. There's certain things that will exist in that type of market that won't necessarily work in other places. I mean, you know, one thing that I think props up Colorado's market more than anything with the cannabis market is diversion of product. You know.
Oh, of course. Of course. It's the gateway
Like
to the Midwest.
the Washington and Oregon's markets haven't been nearly as robust as Colorado. And it's pretty easy to see why, because everybody around here doesn't need shit, or they don't, or it's like Montana. They don't, there's not many people.
Sure.
Right.
All the states that you're adjacent to have plenty. And
Right.
And it's coastal, so there's water on one side.
Right, exactly.
We're right here in the middle with all the interstates. No, it's obvious, and it's funny that, you know, that's not really talked about. But it's so friggin' obvious. When I'm, you know, stocking up a dispensary and they're letting off grams of shatter at $17.50 and they're going through a pound in 6 days, you really think that people in Denver are just dabbing all that? Like,
Take
that's
some grab dabs
They're
at those kind of
definitely
prices.
not.
And to me, it's the weird, like, so for all that's been sacrificed in cannabis and for all that makes less sense in a way than it did 10 years ago, you know, how much different is it? I think maybe it's, this is the scary thing.
In Washington, it's drastically different.
What do you mean by
Think about it like this. If you're 18 years old right now and you just graduated, or I guess you have to be 21. So you're 21 years old in Washington State and you want to buy your first sack of legal weed.
Right.
Or just first sack of weed, period, that you didn't like get from your brother's that's older than you and got him to go buy it at the store. It's like liquor, you know?
Sure, high school kids.
You pay
drink
someone
plenty of
that's over
booze.
21 to go buy it, that's your first experience. So you don't get to know your product. You're like a Jack Daniels kid, or you're a whatever that rum is, you know? Like,
Sure, Captain Morgan's.
the kids pick their brand and that's what they are, and they drink Crown Royal or
Right.
whatever.
Right. But you certainly
that's
they're
just
not
like-
going and picking up different and exploring. And so
No, and even in sack of weed,
Well,
it's
like,
a
can
childproof container.
you open
full
up
of-
the bottle of Crown Royal at the liquor store and take a sniff and then be like, yeah, this is what I want? No, you just buy it and then, you
But
know.
that said, liquor stores do wine tastings and things like that for exactly that reason. You know.
I don't know. I don't know if they do it here.
Now the really interesting thing is, you know, when we talk about diversion, what I hear is that it's worth so much more if it's in packaging, right? Like, people will pay more for it in other states if it's.
Oh, yeah.
Not just if it's a 5 gram of shatter, like a 5 gram of shatter.
I mean, I grew up in Virginia. There's plenty making it there.
Sure, I bet. But, you know, it's crazy. Like, a 5 gram of shatter folded up in parchment is not worth as much as like a mediocre gram of shatter that's in a Mylar that's got the state regulations on it and all that.
That's what I'm saying, is that people in those other states, like Virginia and stuff, they specifically go to Colorado and fly back with it and they want it in package, untampered with, you know?
And what's crazy to me is that...
And specifically Colorado product, you know?
Yeah, exactly. They can prove that it's Colorado product. But what's funny is,
Correct.
as we all know, the best Colorado product doesn't come in those fancy packages. So their first impressions of Colorado product and what they think is the best cannabis in the world.
For Maryland or New York, Pennsylvania, they don't. I mean, it's killer to them.
Sure, it is, but they still don't. That's what they think is the absolute best, and it's just that it goes back to those slipping standards, right? Because then when Maryland legalizes, they think they know what fire is, and it's like amber brown shatter in a nice Mylar.
Well, okay, so to go back to one of the points I was making a little bit earlier is that the market is basically how much of the consumption and volume do you think is by 18 to 32-year-olds? Like 70, 80% probably,
yes,
in terms of volume.
Yes, because I think most of the diversion is in that age group too, right? So even whether they're consuming it or just buying it and reselling it, for sure. 75%.
So every 14 years, let's say 80% of the entire market changes, consumers, right?
Right, of the main
So
thrust of the
basically, right, and they don't become long-term consumers. So, I mean, it's just a passing phase for a lot of people in life, right? And that's what we're going to see is like these heritage products, these old products, whatever, there won't even be a consumer base left to even remember that stuff by the time you capitalize on it. It's going to be always about the new thing, so to speak, right?
Because it's always new people who are making up the mess.
Right, because it's always new people. Even if it is you bringing something that's old back, you have to repackage it as something new. You can't you can't be like, oh, you guys remember this? No, it's like, look at this new shit, right?
For sure. And it's interesting,
and that's just how I see it. It's like music. I mean, this even happens with music. I mean, do you remember in the 90s when they basically repackaged all the rock songs and then did them as rap songs? And it was like just every fucking song was a Led Zeppelin rip, like Puff Daddy Led Zeppelin rip or whatever.
Sure.
You know? You're just recycling stuff instead of having to create new, right?
And, with genetics more than music, you get into some limitations, right? When you've been breeding a line and you're locked into certain traits, and you don't have new material, outside material to introduce new genetics into that cross, things are going to kind of be stuck in that rut one way or another. As you said, it's, I feel like there's this, they have these pictures on the internet of like what all humans will look like in 2060, and everyone's like kind of every combination of humans mixed together, right? The skin's like sort of a lightish brown, and the eyes are maybe like 1 in 20 has light eyes, but most of them have sort of like darker eyes. But, it sort of becomes homogenized, and that's what's going to happen with the loss of these heirloom lines and with the loss of landrace to go with. Like, when we come to a point where there's no landrace cannabis and the heirloom lines are extinct because they're not as profitable, how do we get out of that then? Right? Like, how are we trapped?
It's globalization and economics. It's the only solution that I can possibly think of, right? And you could, and this isn't necessarily a solution, but let's say a state has we've already lost it because like 3 of the states that had it are already almost legal. Like the ideal situation, let's say for California, if you wanted to actually make the economy of cannabis after legalization as robust as it is right now, right? You have to stop large business interest, and you have to cap square footage at a small amount. So, like, if you were to go to California right now and average every single grow how many square feet they have, I bet you'd average between 1,000 to 2,000 square feet per grower.
You're not including outdoor, obviously.
No, because outdoor, most of that's supplying other states. I'm talking about just for the state to supply itself.
I got you.
So
what's on the shelf?
The amount of square footage of weed that's being sold to Californians, right, to smoke. If you were to take that square footage, right, and divide it by the amount of growers, it would probably be 1,000 to 2,000 square feet. High quality, maximum 40 to 80 light gardens for the most part. Few big guys, but mostly smaller guys, right?
Yeah.
And California supplies a lot of the rest of the state. But if you do the math on it, like in Washington, we ended up with 650 licensed producers. the market is going to be worth about $1 billion a year, probably here, right? Mm. So if every single one of those 650 producers, well, all of them want to do $1 million a year in commerce, right?
Of course.
So if they all do $2 million a year in commerce, you're already going over the $1.2 billion volume of cannabis, right? In terms of sales.
Right.
Right. So now you're starting to overproduce, which is going to cause collapse because it's an agricultural perishable product,
and we're on the brink of that
doesn't last, doesn't stay around. So like you grow more of it and you keep growing more of it, but people aren't consuming it. Eventually, it crashes. Right.
We're about to see the first giganto greenhouse pull downs here in Colorado, and we saw the 500 pounds show up a little earlier this year. I think we're going to see the $250 pound within the next 6 months, and it's going to be not high quality, right? Like you're going to be able to get better for more,
right? But people are just willing to sell it for that to get their money back, right?
Yep. And you better believe.
I mean, this happens with every agricultural crop. This isn't like unique to cannabis at all. Look at the history of every single agricultural crop, even bananas, apples, acai berries, fucking anything. Sure. Name it. It's had its peak and then it falls off, and then it usually ends up crashing really hard, and then you end up with farmers unions or government subsidies, one of those two.
Yep.
Neither of which is very viable in cannabis.
So then what's your angle, bud? Obviously, you're in it.
So what I was saying is that you cap it at 2,000 square feet of canopy, right? So anybody that's got shitloads of money that wants to dump it in and then become a billionaire on cannabis, they have no interest. They can only grow 2,000 square feet. That's it, right? So you're protecting all the small producers, and you're allowing for a much more robust market of high-quality products by proud. In 2,000 square feet of canopy is like a couple hundred lamps. If you can't make enough money on today, and by capping the square footage at that, you would be protecting today's ultimate value in the market, right?
So here's my question in that case, or what I'd be afraid of in that case, is something we're seeing here where, okay, all these independent places come up, and then the time comes that the people with the big they wait, they see their first boom, then business plateaus a little, then regulations kind of get pricey to keep up with, and then the big people with the big money come in and buy up 13 or 14 different independent licenses, but they're all owned by the same big mega conglomerate.
It's still only 2,000 square feet apiece, and it's going to cost you a lot of money to operate. It's still going to preserve the same amount of jobs, market. It's still going to make producing too much hard. Everything's the same.
But don't you think there would be, I guess part of it is like the intention of it, right? Like when you have that diversity, if you're ensuring everyone only has 2,000 square feet of canopy, then you're maximizing the number of producers versus when you start having some producers now controlling.
That's what we have right now. We have an artificially imposed square footage limit based on police.
And we have it.
And it seems to work pretty good. Products are worth a lot. Demand and supply is relatively even. It's only now that because the police are lessening up on people who are becoming massive producers that we're starting to see these major dips in prices. And this is the same for anything. You industrialize and commercialize it and allow large corporations to produce vast quantities of it with the least amount of input as possible. That's when the price goes down. You get too many of those guys doing it, and the price gets fucked.
And then you look at the grocery store market for tomatoes, right? You got your regular hothouse tomatoes, etc. And then there are the heirloom tomatoes, the really exotic looking and tasting ones. But most grocery stores don't stock them because 90% of the people want the cheap ones that just kind of taste like a tomato.
Correct. But we're 80 years past the change of our farms. People like none of us grew up on heirloom tomatoes, so no one even has any interest in getting them because they never even developed a taste for them.
Right,
That's what I was saying earlier.
Now it's a curiosity.
How do you expect these kids to develop a taste for something that they never even experienced?
It's the same thing with the apples.
Or an appreciation. Right.
And
no one even knows to ask for them anymore because it's so far beyond when it changed from small family-owned and operated farms to massive industrialized, commercialized farms.
And what's crazy about, specifically when you look at heirloom produce, and it carries over, once upon a time that was just called produce. That wasn't heirloom produce. That was produce.
No.
Now that there's like
right,
a monoculture,
and you didn't have to worry about organic or non-organic or any of that shit. Everybody had small farms, and they were mostly isolated from each other, and people grew different kinds of plants, and they rotated crops. Pests weren't a massive issue unless it was like a cicada year or something,
Sure. And we could see these trends, happening so much to cannabis. So here's kind of on a closing note. Give 15 more minutes, and then we'll do our shout-outs and wrap. So looking at this, have we already seen the golden age of cannabis? Is that past us?
I think so, yeah.
When do you think that? What is that sort of period, 10 years ago, 5 years ago? Or do you think it was further back?
I'd say it was between the, depending on who you were and who you knew, I would assume, anytime in the 70s all the way up until probably 2010. And that was about when we started seeing this real globalized consumerism of cannabis, right? Or at least nationalized, right? I mean, man, I have Russian buddies, and they're like, yeah, we be in Russia and sell it,
Sure.
I mean,
and
they sent the clone, and it's out there growing, It's like, dude, that's real. It's, that exists 20 years ago very much. And if it did, it was like such a tiny market. It wasn't like warehouses full of the shit.
Sure. I mean, you think of the seed market then and the seed market now. That's actually a great segue because chat room wants to know about new stuff you're working on, new stuff you're putting out. So let's segue right to that.
Yeah, I just redid a bunch of the face-off stuff, and that stuff's all available right now. And I'm just working the do-si-do line, trying to find a good male. Been working on it for a couple of years and just haven't been finding exactly what I want. So that's mainly it.
I think
and I'm growing out a bunch of old seeds. All the old seeds I have, I'm popping and growing.
So is that back to
anything that's 15 years old I bought back then or traded for or got when I went to Hawaii or any of that stuff.
So you're not talking about old seeds you made. You mean old? You're going back. You're going into the vault.
All old stuff I made too. HP13 Albert Walker hybrid, or the 32 line, which is the Manic crossed with Albert Walker, and a male from that crossed to HP13. So a lot of stuff that doesn't have OG in it, and I mean, I don't know if people are interested in it, but it is to me. So I'll grow it for myself, for anybody else.
And now your Portland location, that's fully rec, right? Like anyone can go in there and buy clones or seeds?
Yep. So for recreational, until the end of the year, you can purchase 4 clones, 5 packs of seed a day, and 7 grams of cannabis flowers, and then 5 grams of BHO or pens. And for some reason, the state thought it was that you could buy pens and BHO, but you can't buy dry sift, bubble hash, or rosin. So recreational. And then medical is the typical medical things where it's much higher limits. Medical patients know their limits. You can get all concentrates, rosin, and everything.
Sure. So on the rec side, do you have the kind of the flowers of what you're offering the genetics of, so people can come in one day, try a few different things, see what they like, and come back and buy seeds or a clone the next?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've got Rude Boy on the shelf. We've got probably some Blackout, Shark Bite. I'm just naming off stuff from seed. Do-si-do. What else is on the shelf that's from seed? I don't know, a bunch of stuff. I mean, at least 6 or 8, 10 things from that are from my seeds, flowers on the shelf, or concentrates on the shelf. So as well as there'll be, usually about 4 varieties in stock for clones.
So does that make you, I think that makes you like the first place in the U.S. to have that at all. You can kind of do it in Amsterdam.
Yeah, I think we're the first seed-to-sale seed bank so to speak, and seed company and seed bank, recreational and medical, available in the country.
That's pretty awesome, dude.
That's
That's
cool.
historic. Like there have been some underground seed banks in upstate New York and stuff, but you couldn't buy the flowers there. Like it's that kind of like whole, like you said, kind of seed, flower, concentrate, any part of the process, clone. That's awesome. And
Yeah, everything but the BHO is all made in-house, too. We do all the processes ourselves. We don't hire out anything. So there's no corners cut or anything, 100% quality control.
Yeah, not quality control.
so, are you afraid of these market trends coming, or do you feel like that you have a unique enough niche that you're going to stand through it and supply a lot of these?
I think it affects everybody. I mean, it's, to think that somehow I'm insulated from that would be extremely naive. I mean, if you just look at any other market, I mean, let's say the equivalent is like a $40 eighth today would be the equivalent of like a $10 apple, right?
Right.
So how much is an apple? Like 75 cents?
Sure. Let's say it's an organic apple and it's like $1.80.
Right. So like basically what you usually see for most produce or most product in general, the difference between, let's say, organic or whatever the quote unquote heady, to use the cannabis terminology,
Sure.
version of something is usually 100% markup. So if something's $5, the good version will be 10, right?
Right.
Once you start banging up into like the $20, $30, your volume just drops off drastically, right?
Sure.
So
nobody's
you
buying
either
a
have to be
$30
like
apple.
really high end and be content with a very, very small volume, right?
Mhm.
And this is going to be dependent on where you are. Like in LA, that may not be a small volume, right?
Sure. It might be.
But in some other markets, it may be a smaller volume. But I mean, I can't see anybody, no matter how good your brand or your quality or how it's grown, getting more than 100% more than another producer that produces Budweiser, right?
Right.
So just to compare to like beer, if a Budweiser's $5, a good beer would be like maybe 10, right?
And you get the places that once a year put out a limited amount of the $20 six packs, but they're only making 500 of them.
Right, but they're not available every week because then you lose. It's just supply and demand. Once you overdo the supply, the demand drops off, right?
Right.
So I think that's going to be relevant. And, so if everybody is allowed to produce acres and acres of cannabis and they need to sell the weed, even if it's $1 a gram, and we're seeing this up in Washington already. I mean, you're seeing packaged indoor quality cannabis for $3 to $4 a gram, and that's packaged by the gram by the producer, right?
Yeah, that's lower than here. Even that's pretty crazy.
That's a great price.
I mean, that's cheap,
price.
and part of that is because here in Washington, the producer and the retailer you're not allowed to own both licenses.
Uh-huh.
So there's no seed to sale producers or growers at all. So all the retailers can collude to basically manipulate the price to whatever they want because the growers sell. Like the retailers need to sell, but they can like buy a bunch of weed and then hold out. I mean, you can manipulate the price. Farmers never get the good end of the stick. Let's just put it that way.
Well, yeah. If there's one thing you can learn from American history, it's pretty much that.
Yeah,
Right. The farmers don't get the good end because you're all in the same boat, and you have to, and especially in a regulated market, you have to sell to them. You can't just like start exporting it.
You can't set up a farm
right?
stand.
I mean, that'd be great. That'd be great if like the state of Washington started letting people that are overproducing export, and then you start getting to export laws, and this is when federal government gets involved, and then you end up with tons of corruption typically, right? But this is how it happens all over the world. You have some resource, you produce it, but then capitalism takes over and you start producing too much, but you can't collapse the price locally, so you have to export it, right?
And that's
the only option.
And it's funny because that was like the whole plan for Jamaica when they legalized. It was going to be an export crop. And no one,
Absolutely.
no one down there at any point thought about the fact that no other country is going to let them going to want to import cannabis. If they're going to have cannabis, they're going to have it, regulated and produced in that country according to its own standards, not imported from elsewhere.
Right. So if you're not gonna allow or have the ability to export products in the future, you have to regulate the local market so that the supply and the demand meet each other, so as to preserve the artificially inflated illegal market that we have. Right. If you want to preserve the value and the tax value to the government of cannabis, the way to do that is to make sure that the supply and the demand meet the same place where they currently are in states, or not even currently, but like where it was like 8 years ago, right?
Well, I think you have the other alternative, right? Like, if you have too many tomatoes, you can start making ketchup. And what we have here is like, well, now it's not unreasonable to try to harvest. If you got 20 acres of herb, harvest terpenes from it. It was stupid to do before because it was more valuable in raw flower form. But now we're getting
once everybody has a ton of terpenes because you can grow fields of whatever for a field weed for cheap, then it's the same problem, right? It's too easy. The reason agriculture always collapses is because it's too easy to grow too much.
Right. Well, yeah, plants want to
grow.
We
all know
plants
that.
want to be abundant. They're not trying. Plants aren't holding out to raise their market value.
No, and once you industrialize it and commercialize it, you grow tons of it for very, very cheap. So people expand until there's way too much. And we've done this with everything. I mean, why do you think we don't grow oranges in Southern California anymore? Because we import all this stuff now. We've done it with our jobs. We've done it with our food. We've done it with our farms. We've done it with everything.
Now, do you think that there is some technical expertise? We haven't talked about hash at all, which is it's weird to talk to you and not talk about hash. But we have to wrap in like 6 minutes, so we can't even get that deep into it. But is there still some technical expertise in, making fine hash, or even in cultivation, that can create sort of regional pockets? One thing you never know, right?
I'm not saying that regional pockets won't exist. I'm just saying that I don't think it's going to become a massive market. Right, or that it's going to be, because that would be to assume that like it may happen. It may happen too, because I mean beer is on a trend towards less. There's more microbreweries than ever. Right.
Right. Yeah.
But all I'm saying.
Oh, dang! We lost Fletch.
Yeah, that call was ended.
Call him back. That was. Oh, man, that was a great conversation.
Oh, yeah, we're coming right back.
Good.
Microbrews on the line.
Sorry, buddy. We lost you there.
We lost you right at Microbrews.
Sorry about that. Yeah. All I'm saying is that it's really easy to grow too much wheat. That's it, right?
Sure. Oh, well, you brought up microbrews.
When you allow everybody to grow as much as they want.
The one thing I like to say about microbrews all the time, and I think it's to your greater point, the cycle we can probably anticipate here is there was one time when there were more microbrews than now, and that was like right after they ended Prohibition, and everybody who was already brewing beer in their bathtub was starting to put it out, and that went through a shake-up in not too long, 10, 20 years, where you ended up with a big 3 or big 4 in the U.S. Yeah, and it wasn't until after
the
going through that for over 100 years.
Yeah.
It took 100 years of that for people to get bored of, okay, beer is boring now. We need new beer. So, and now it's thriving, of course. So I think we're going to see that cycle in cannabis. But, yeah, I think there is some delusion that, like, oh, we're going to go right into the craft stage of this. Like, no. You have to go into the homogenize and consolidate stage, and then the craft stage is a reaction to that.
Yeah, and then also to compare it to the beer
Correct.
industry, we're still in a nascent industry with the new resurgence of the craft beer industry. I mean, way more people are into it than I remember people were into it like 5 years ago, 7 years ago, and the cannabis industry will evolve a lot too.
Right, but like Mitch said, it took 100 years for it to go that way, and I'm not. It may be it didn't take long for us to go from completely illegal to where we are right now. So I mean, this may be a completely accelerated.
Oh, shit certainly moves faster now than it did in the early 20th century, 1940s and shit.
Right, of course. But I just mean in terms of like how fast this market has changed. We may see that the bottom hit real hard, and then it emerges back to like what it used to be. But I mean, the thing is like there's a lot of people that are investing millions and millions and millions of dollars into these operations, and they want to sell all that product. They want to do. I mean, here's the thing: is how much money has Colorado done this year?
Oh, they just put out a new number that in August. Hang on, I'll tell you August Colorado sales. Hold on, because we broke the record.
But it's like $1 billion a year, right?
Yeah.
So let's say you have 1,000 lamps, and you want to do 2,000 pounds of harvest, right? So you're going to do 10,000 pounds of weed, right, a year. And then let's say you want to get $2,000 for that, right? Right. So what is that? $20 million?
Right. And the total market is not going to support that when you have 900 licensed producers.
Exactly. If you want to have $20 million just in your flowers, and that's not even the retail value, that's just the wholesale value. So like that's $20 million, and then let's say another $10 million in like concentrate and trim and whatever else, right? Let's just theoretically say. So 30 mil, and then that's going to be worth like double that retail value. So out of $1 billion, you want to do 6% of the whole market,
right, in
one facility, right? So what do you need? People to have 120% fulfillment of the entire market. So where does the other 640 producers go in the case of Washington State?
And then, what I think makes it even...
And that's if the cap, and that's if the square footage cap is enough for someone to put up 1,000 lamps, right?
And then I think, what makes that even more restricted is... And admittedly, right, like our circle's a little biased, but when I ask on Facebook, whose business plan is to grow connoisseur cannabis, I get 50 guys at least whose business plan is to, they're going to make it on the connoisseur market. But then when I ask how big the connoisseur market is, no one really thinks it's more than 2%. So Colorado's market is, I just looked it up, it's about $1.5 billion a year. So, 2% of $1.5 billion, make sure I got my math right here. 02. That's $30 million, sure, but you divide that between the 50 guys.
But I think Colorado. Let's take $500 million off Colorado because that's export money. Well, that's not like once everybody's legal, it won't be like that.
Sure, and tourism too.
So let's just say it's $1 billion. So if you want to do $60 million a year, you're 6% of the market. Owning 6% of any market in an entire state means you are a powerhouse.
Huge,
and it's
huge.
not something you just like dropped into. And you're definitely not going to be a 6% shareholder with an indoor grow. I'll tell you that much, right? Because the guys that are going to be 10% shareholders are going to be the cheapest, the best weed for the cheapest price, and the cheapest ain't inside.
Exactly.
Because that's a quantity. You're in a quantity battle. If you want like 0.1%, you can charge almost whatever you want depending on what your business model is. Almost anything's possible on the smaller end of the spectrum, but once you pass a threshold of volume, you end up in the wholesale market with every other producer.
And once you're in that market, it's pure commodity, right? Then it becomes about who can make the most the cheapest.
Right. Even if you have better quality, your price is still going to be manipulated by whatever their price is,
sure,
because of the volume you need to sell.
And just like I said before, maybe you can ask twice as much. Hell, maybe you can even ask 5 times as much as they are. But if they get the pounds down to 100, you're certainly not going to be able to be selling for $1,500 a pound.
Exactly. So I think the economics of this is going to really play out in the next 5 to 7 years because, unlike grapes collapsed in California, right? Wine grapes, because everybody started producing them because wine was going crazy 10 years ago, right?
And you have a similar thing in terms of the investment bubble, right? Like you have the agricultural bubble, and then you have the investment bubble on top of it. So, as you said, so many millions are being poured into cannabis without any view of what we're discussing, right? Like they think they're just going to make money hand over fist. And when reality when karma comes home to roost in 5 to 10 years, this bubble is going to collapse completely. It's just going to be like the end of tech, where people will suddenly realize that they were sold promises by people who weren't qualified to make those promises.
Well, and we're just talking about the future here. I mean, it's based on our previous experience of the cannabis marketplace, where everybody was capped by basically not wanting to get busted, right? You could basically grow as much as you wanted because there was very few other people that were willing to compete on that level, right? Now it's the exact opposite. Everybody's putting up 1,000 lights, and that's the problem. If you let everybody do it, it's too much product. You're growing enough product for, way too many people.
All right, we got one more archive question for you from the chat room here. People want to know about the face-off. I know you've told the story on the show, but we got new listeners. How did it come into your hands? Yep. Why do you like to breed with it?
So Chris Cassis from the Source Genetics, the real OG Cushman, he gave me seeds in like 2005 or 2006. Sometime when he moved back to California, he gave me seeds, and he would remember better than I do. He's got a photographic memory. But he gave me some face-off seeds. I think there were 5 of them. Some pure Kush seeds. Handful of OG Kush S1s, probably about 16 to 20 plants, if I remember right. All different hybrids, and they were all bag seeds from when he was buying OG when he was, however old, in the late 90s. And that was the face-off plant from the batch of 5 seeds, the number 4 plant. Was the face-off number 4, and that's the mother plant that I've used for my breeding.
And obviously now you have the face-off BX male that you're hitting to a lot of things.
And so I made that using the Manic, which was a variety that I got from Shroomy 420, the guy that made the Shrom.
Right.
So he gave me a bunch of seeds and a whole bunch of different plants. We traded plants back in the day, and he sent me clones of the Manic, a male and a female of those plants that he had obtained from some people in Humboldt. And the female was like purple Urkel, but without the purple smell. It looked like it a lot. Real stout indica, swollen calyxes, a little bit of purple color, sweet candy smell, but none of that like characteristic grape smell.
Not to the grapey, right? Just candy. Cool.
Right, just the candy. And then there was a male that came with it that was from the same seeds, and it was supposedly an F5. Both of those plants were from an F5 seed generation. That's all I really know about it because I received them both as clones, and that was what I made the number 32 line with, and that's also what the Face-Off 4's father was in the original outcross, and then that was back crossed to the Face-Off 4 again, and that's the BX1.
And is there, other than obviously your long history with it, is there a reason that you decided to produce that male to be your stud?
Because it was an line, and the female was like, I didn't want to breed with something that had really heavy characteristics because it would influence the next generation. What I was trying to do was preserve mother plants and their smell and flavors, not create something new in a lot of cases, right?
So you were just trying to give
structure.
So
that male, so that male was basically a blank male in that he didn't really produce a whole lot of traits that moved the plant, the seed plants, the progeny, away from the mother plant that I used. So if I crossed it with Albert Walker, it was either the plants that came from that F1 were either like Albert Walker, smelled mostly like Albert Walker, or just smelled like just muted out, right?
But you didn't get any that smelled like a face-off, per se.
No, well, this is just the pure Manic cross with the Albert Walker.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So when you cross it with the face-off, the same thing happens. You either end up with lots of face-off flavor, like mediocre, or like not very much at all, right? And it didn't really change it. And that's what I was trying to do, because if you just select F2s and things like that from there, I was trying to preserve the smell and flavor of the mother, not create a new smell and flavor, right?
So, all right,
the less the male changed the female's characteristics, the better, in my opinion, for that initial outcrossing to preserve the line's flavor.
So I lied. I told
It's
you
like
that was
if you're
the last
making
question.
soup, why would you throw like a ton of sriracha sauce if you don't want it to taste like sriracha?
Or if you're making a stock that you're going to mix with a bunch of other stuff, exactly.
Right.
Okay, so now chat room is asking me. I don't even think you had anything to do with this. They want to know about the Paris OG.
I mean, I don't have anything to do with it. Those other guys, their shit's branded Paris. The Paris Perris is a town outside of Riverside where people have been growing OG for I don't know a while. It's kind of like I don't know, wouldn't call it mountain community, but it's kind of rural. Not for Southern California, it's rural.
Sure.
But it's just out there, and that's what they've been growing and selling out there.
Right on. Well,
and my assumption, and although I don't know because I don't know those other guys, is that they probably were just buying that weed and decided to brand it as Paris.
Sure.
You know,
that makes sense. It wouldn't be the first time something like that happened with some weed.
Biker. OG.
Right. I mean, OG has literally. You remember Blue Ivy OG, Michael Phelps OG. I mean,
Sure.
it doesn't matter what comes before it.
Yeah, you just throw OG on the end, and there was a period.
It's irrelevant anymore. It's completely irrelevant. The original purposes of the names was to differentiate cuts in a single grow room so that you could label them and compare them. Now it's actually like a sales marketing term.
It's purely marketing, right? It's a product name now.
Right.
Well,
right. Before it was to just differentiate where the source was from. You couldn't put OG Kush on all of them. So
exactly, that would defeat the purpose completely. Well, right on, buddy. We made it all the way through the show, and I still got to do my commercials, and I got to wrap up. So thanks for hanging with us, bud. I haven't talked to you in a few months. It's been good to catch up.
Yep, for sure. Anytime.
I'm going to try to come out to Portland and visit you soon. I got to check out the store and chill on that turf.
Yeah, for sure. We're open. We should be open 7 days a week here soon. So.
Oh, nice. Do you want to shout out?
We're just open.
Do you want to shout out the store? Do you want to
What's
give anyone any info on where they can get in touch with you, how they can come visit, anything like that? Put it out there for the listeners.
Yeah, you can go to the store. It's in southeast Portland off Foster Road, 10645 Southeast Henry Street. We're open Wednesday through Sunday right now, and we should be open Monday and Tuesday here shortly. And, like Mitch said, we got pretty much everything from seed to sale and hash and everything you could basically be looking for, and lots of samples of the seeds and clones that we're selling.
Right on. And, of course, we're about to do the Seeds Here Now shout out, so we're going to, obviously, you can get
for sure.
What are you dropping there?
Yeah, I'm dropping, there's a couple packs of Dosey Face that are going to be auctioned off for Josh D's father-in-law. And I think that's this Wednesday. You can check Seeds Here Now, their stuff, for details on where to go auction for those.
Awesome. Well,
they're charity for Josh D, OG Kush, Real OG Kush Stories, father-in-law.
And I got to say, bud, I don't have the analytics in front of me, but judging by the chat room traffic, this is going to rank up there as one of the more popular shows we've ever done.
Yep.
You're coming up on Bodie levels here, which is interesting because you've never made yourself a man of mystery.
Yeah, well, I just try to do my own thing, and I was fortunate to kind of be in the right place at the right times and some of this cannabis stuff, and fortunate to know some of the people that bestowed some of the heritage on me. So I'm just thankful people care to listen to some of that history.
And, man, we're always grateful for that. You are here willing to share it with us because thankfully we can preserve it in this format. Well, Fletch, we're going to let you go now, bud. Again, great talking to you. Thank you so much for your time. Always a pleasure, my man. And we're going to do our shout-outs and wrap the show.
Cool. Thanks.
Thanks, buddy. Have a good one.
Yep. Later.
All right. Now you want to take it right into shout-outs?
Yeah, let's talk about if we get some seeds from him, how the hell do we grow them, right?
All right. You got to get stuff to grow it with, don't you? Don't you there? And, of course, we love to tell you to do it from Way to Grow. Let's pull up a sale this month. Let's talk about the lights. It's good stuff. Good stuff.
Yeah, let's give you
Started 2 days ago. It's going for a couple weeks now. They got the Gavita Pro E-Series 1000 watt at $475. The Sun Systems LEC 315 240 volt veg, that's $425. And the Phantom double-ended 1000 watt 240 volt is $375. But wait, because we got
Because you're in the know. Because all these people are in the know.
Yeah, you guys are in the inside club.
Yeah, it's the secret handshake right here.
It's really the secret words. But
wow.
Let's just talk about this, right? That Phantom double-ended open reflector, 1000 watt, right? MSRP on that is $589.99, and they got it on the sale for $375. You mentioned Adam Dunn Show, you get it for $325. That's crazy. Just because you listen to the show, so you don't have to pay to listen to the show, and it's like we pay you almost.
Yeah.
Because you can go save $50 and then do whatever. Buy some archive seats or something. Also, if you're trying to go really all the way, right? The PL Lights NXT2 double-ended 1000 watt, either the 120 volt or the 240 volt. So if you're going commercial, this is cool. And remember, this is not an advertised sale. This is only for listeners of the Adam Dunn Show. You got to go down to Way to Grow. You got to mention Adam Dunn Show. Tell them you want the PL NXT2 double-ended 1000 watt. Comes the whole fixture. Again, it's usually $650. You mention Adam Dunn Show, you're getting it for $415. That's killer. You just saved $200 plus.
Kaboom.
You can almost buy another light with what you save on the first light.
Yep.
Crazy. Go down to Way to Grow. Find your location at waytogrow.net. Check them out.
Crush it this next round.
Yeah, do it. Go big this winter. You can afford to. And, of course,
and to fuel that work as you're crushing your next round,
our buddies at Incredibles Edibles, our favorite gourmet handcrafted edibles. Listen, if there's a flavor you like that's not like Sriracha A1 Tabasco, if there's a chocolate confection that you could imagine. Oh, and true that. There's Fireberry, even if you like the spicy.
Just no Sriracha flavored.
Sure. You like blueberries? They got it. Caramel toffee? They got it. You like Pop Rocks? They got it. You like mint? They got it. Peach? Sure. Banana? Sure. Peanut butter? Yup. Pumpkin pie? Absolutely. Cookies and cream? Strawberry? Pistachio? Coffee? Mint? All that stuff. I can't think of a non-infused chocolate company that produces such a range of flavors that are so delicious. And, you get for between 100 and 350 milligrams, 500 milligrams a bar, depending on what you're going with. Of course, our favorite's that Fireberry, 300 milligrams, roasted habaneros, and strawberries, absolutely delicious.
Quick little nibble.
Raspberries, pardon me, habanero raspberry. And that's the way to go. It's hard to beat. You can find out more at iloveincredibles.com, and you can find a store in your market or a market near you by clicking the Find a Store button on the top front and center at iloveincredibles.com. And while you're clicking around on the internet, don't forget to stop by our buddies at Build a Soil. Obviously, if you're in the chat room, it's very clear nearly everyone who's listening to the Adam Dunn Show is growing organic, and nearly everyone is shopping from Build a Soil. And it's not because we talk about it. It's because you can shop around on the internet. You're not going to find a better deal. You're not going to find better quality. You're not going to find better customer service. It doesn't exist. That's why Jeremy started Build a Soil, because it doesn't exist. Find another place that's selling soil on the internet that has the soil test analysis. Go ahead and click that, buddy.
Yeah, and gives you the recipe.
And gives you the recipe of how to make it yourself.
And tells you how to do it.
And insists that if you can find the materials near you, get them near you. Don't waste the carbon to ship them. Yeah. Jeremy truly practices what he preaches. Yeah. They really believe in changing the world through organics at Build a Soil, and that's why we can't recommend them emphatically enough. Check them out at buildasoil.com. And, of course, while you're getting your mixes ready, maybe you got your new lights at Way to Grow, you're picking up some Coots mix from Build a Soil, check out some Grow Stones. Trust me, I know you've been using Perlite forever, and you like the way it crushes in your hand, but you don't really like breathing the dust. And
like how it floats.
You don't like how it floats. And, but what else is there? What else are you going to use? You tried Lava Rock. You don't like Lava Rock. Grow Stones, I'm telling you. They're engineered. They're made from recycled glass, first of all. There's only so much perlite. As Adam likes to say, we're running out of Perlite Mountain. There's only so much perlite that can be mined from the earth. We will run out of it in the next 10, 20 years. Grow stones, we're not going to run out of, because it can be recycled. You could even recycle grow stones into more grow stones if you had to. So I think that alone is a good reason to go with it. When you talk about the fact that it is an engineered product, it's not just like, oh, hey, this can work for aeration and drainage. this has an ideal aeration, an ideal drainage. You listen in a couple weeks, we're going to have Paula Costa, PhD, on from Growstones. She's going to talk about that and educate us a lot more as to what we want going on down in that rhizosphere, the root zone. And, of course, big shout out to KCI. Hit it. Hydroponicresearch.com. Hydroponic Research, the makers of Veg and Bloom. And like we said, if you want to go simple, like you want to go, it's important for you to be sterile. If you're working in a state that has pharmaceutical standards like Illinois, Veg and Bloom's the way to go. If you are currently growing with bottles, right? You can be in the organic realm. You're in your organic realm, and you're growing that way, and obviously we support that. It goes without saying. We're just talking about it. But if you're growing with bottles right now, first of all, you're paying for water, so you're getting suckered there. Just buy the powder, dissolve it in the water that you already got coming from your tap, and they probably have more money to buy another light there. So we already got you 3 lights for the price of one.
Saving money.
Not only that, you're saving space. That little jar, it's so concentrated, but you don't have to measure. You don't have to pH. They make it for your pH. You send them your water, and they tell you, or they formulate it for you. And when you're talking about large-scale, idiot-proof facility, that you want good quality, good looking, better than average herb, way better than average herb, smells great, looks stunning, huge yields, you can only go with Veg and Bloom. Check out hydroponic-research.com. You will thank me for doing it. You're going to see these guys are working at really the cutting edge of designing nutrients for indoor cannabis, specifically. Done. That's it. This isn't for growing tomatoes. This isn't for growing any crop. This is precision engineered for cannabis. And of course,
fuel that.
Seeds.
Here. Now. Seeds.
Here.
Now.
Seeds.
Here.
Now.
Seeds.
Here.
Now.
Seeds.
Here.
Now.
Seeds.
Here. Now. Seeds Here Now, of course. Our favorite source for seeds. Whether you're looking for archive seeds, we got some of that coming. You heard Fletch just talking about some of the auctions he's got going. But he's got a bunch of other great deals going on this month. Swamp Boy seeds, $124.88 a pack. Huge discount there. Exotic Genetics, Crockett Family Farms, Bog Seeds, and Ethos Collective are $98 a pack. I don't know if they have any of the Harambe from Ethos left in stock, but that one seems like it's about to blow up. $98 a pack's a steal. La Plata Labs, Mosca Seeds, and Loud Seeds are buy one, get one free. And, of course, all orders over $150 will get a free gift pack from Adam Dunn himself of TH Seeds Darkstar. And, of course, congratulations to Exotic Genetics on winning double cups last weekend. Next week, Seeds Here Now will have the pre-sale on Exotic Starfighter The Cube. And the drop is releasing November 1st. And, of course, you can grab that drop by Archive now with a restock coming next week. You will find the lowest prices on Archive Seeds, the best prices at seedsherenow.com. And that auction for the limited Archive release, keep an eye out, coming next week. What you want to do is you go to seedsherenow.com, scroll all the way down to the bottom. Do it, KTI. Show them. All the way down. There you go. You messed it. Sign up. Enter your email address right there. Put that in there. When they do the auction, when James is about to launch that auction, he will let you know. And once you know, you can participate, get some of these limited drops, and maybe you can be the strain preservationist that's given us the genetics we need in 50 years. You got any shout-outs, KTI?
Yeah, shout out to Vinny and the kid for setting everything up.
Yeah, we sounded good
and
today.
Adam being far away.
Being out there in Rhode Island. I heard he was flying from a helicopter and shooting machine guns. Did you hear that story?
Goodness. No, I didn't, but that sounds like a... Let's see the videos. Is that from the gram or
he was
something?
going to try to send us videos.
Oh, man,
it's all on this private land. This guy has the helicopter and the machine guns and a bunch of stuff to shoot. And the people in the town tried to, complain. And the cops were like, no, it's totally legal. It's his land, his machine gun. You can do that.
I love this country.
God bless America.
God bless America.
Of course, shout out to my remarkable wife, Reese. About to go meet her and little Kyoto Farron for dinner. A big shout out to Adam, Cece, Ace down at the farm, little Nick, the rest of the farm crew, Joel down there. I don't know who else is down there helping with the harvest. You might.
Yeah, Sonny.
Tanner. You got anyone else?
No.
Who Adam would shout out usually?
I mean...
No. And shout out the chat gang. you guys listening in is why we keep doing it. We'll catch you guys next week. We're going to try to look at, I think, some of the legalization initiatives next week. Probably
Maybe
specifically
do a debate
California.
or something like that.
Yeah, a little debate.
Something
like
California, though, for
and
sure.
then, don't forget, week after that, Dr. Paul Acosta? Or am I screwing that up?
No. Week after that is Dr. Paul Acosta.
And then week after that, we got Max
Montrose.
Montrose. She's going to teach us interpreting. Which,
the Trichome Institute.
Of Trichome Institute. He's going to teach us. He teaches a course in how to identify strains by their smell.
Yeah.
And, we're going to do it here live on the show. You guys are going to...
It'll be a post-Dope Cup judging.
Yeah. So it'll be good times. Of course, don't forget to link up with us on Facebook. Don't forget to link up with us on Instagram. Subscribe to us on everything. Click the little heart button that's way up top over here. I'm going to go deal with the rest of my stomach ache. Thanks for listening, guys. Have a good one.
Practically every one of the top 40 records being played on every radio station in the United States is a communication to the children to take a trip, to cop out, to groove. The psychedelic jackets on the record albums have their own hidden messages.
Special question. We don't want you to smoke genetically modified ganja. We want you to smoke the real thing. We want you to smoke the